Such is the psychology of those whose tears come too easily, and the world mistakes their depth for fragility. You see them everywhere, though they've learned to hide it. The ones who cry during movies that aren't particularly sad, who well up at commercials, at songs, at the kindness of strangers, who feel the weight of the world pressing against their chest and the only release is through their eyes. They've heard it their whole lives. You're too sensitive. Why are you crying again? It's not that serious. As if the frequency of their tears somehow invalidates the legitimacy of their feeling. As if emotional regulation means emotional suppression. And so they've learned shame. Learned to excuse themselves. Learned to say, "I'm sorry" when the tears come, as if their physiology is an inconvenience they're inflicting on others. But here's what nobody tells them. Their tears are not a malfunction. They are a language. And the fact that they speak it fluently while others remain mute doesn't make them broken. Such is the psychology of those born without the calluses most people develop to survive the world's cruelty. They cry in bathrooms at work, in parked cars before entering their homes, in the shower where the water can disguise the sound. They've mapped every private space where feeling is permitted because showing it publicly has consequences they've learned to predict. Colleagues whisper. Friends grow uncomfortable. Partners accuse them of manipulation or attention-seeking, as if tears could only ever be performance rather than involuntary response to overwhelm. And the most damaging part? They start to believe it themselves. Start to wonder if maybe everyone else is right. Maybe they are too much. Maybe there's something wrong with their wiring. Maybe they need to fix this thing about themselves that keeps leaking out despite their best efforts to contain it. The pattern emerges in the rituals of concealment they've perfected. They know exactly how long they can hold back tears before they become physically painful. They know which lighting makes red eyes less obvious. They know how to laugh immediately after crying so people think it was just a moment rather than a state of being. They've become experts at emotional camouflage. But watch what this does to them over time. Watch how the energy required to suppress what wants to naturally express begins to consume everything else. The creativity, the spontaneity, the capacity for joy. Because you cannot selectively numb. When you close the door on grief, you close it on everything. Brené Brown's research on vulnerability demonstrates this precisely. Emotional suppression doesn't protect us from pain. It separates us from connection, from authenticity, from the very experiences that make life meaningful. These people who cry easily aren't failing at emotional regulation. They're succeeding at emotional honesty. The world just punishes honesty and rewards performance. So they learn to perform. They practice neutral expressions in mirrors. They rehearse responses to "Are you okay?" that won't invite further inquiry. They master the art of seeming fine while drowning internally. And this mastery costs them something they can't quite name but can definitely feel. The exhaustion of living at odds with themselves. Such is the psychology that learned to treat their own emotions as enemies requiring constant surveillance. And people notice the crying, but they don't notice the cost of not crying, the headaches, the tension that lives in their jaw, their shoulders, their chest, the way their body keeps the score even when their face maintains composure. Psychologist Wilhelm Reich called this muscular armoring, the way the body hardens against feeling until the suppression becomes physical. These people who cry easily haven't developed that armor. Or perhaps they tried and failed. Either way, they remain permeable in a world that values impermeability. And this permeability has consequences. They absorb the emotions of rooms they enter. Feel the tension in conversations others don't notice. Carry the weight of suffering they witness even when it's not theirs to carry. Empathy isn't a choice for them. It's an involuntary response, like breathing. The neuroscientist Giacomo Rizzolatti discovered mirror neurons, brain cells that fire both when we act and when we observe others acting. For most people, this creates basic empathy. For these individuals, the mirroring runs deeper, more automatic, more consuming. They don't just understand others' pain, they feel it. And feeling it triggers the physiological response: tears. The roots grow in soil that was tilled long before they were old enough to remember. Attachment theory, developed by John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth, reveals that our early relationships shape our emotional responsiveness. A child whose emotions were welcomed develops different neural pathways than a child whose emotions were dismissed or punished. But here's the complexity. Some of these people who cry easily had parents who welcomed emotion, who created safety for feeling, and their tears now are not pathology but the continuation of that early permission. They cry easily because they were never taught that crying is shameful. Others had the opposite experience, parents who said, "Stop crying, or I'll give you something to cry about," who demanded emotional suppression as a condition of love. And their tears now are rebellion, the body's refusal to comply with internalized tyranny. Carl Jung understood this as the return of the repressed. What we push into the shadow doesn't disappear. It finds other routes to expression. And for some, those routes are through tear ducts that won't cooperate with the mind's attempt at control. Freud would recognize this as the conflict between id and superego, the raw feeling versus the internalized rules about acceptable emotional display. And these people who cry often, they're the ones where the id keeps winning, no matter how much the superego demands otherwise. But there's another origin, less discussed but equally significant. Some people are simply born with nervous systems that run hotter. Elaine Aron's research on highly sensitive people demonstrates that 15 to 20% of the population processes sensory and emotional information more deeply. This isn't disorder, it's temperament. Such is the psychology that emerged from 1,000 small moments where feeling was either permitted or forbidden, and the body kept the record. And here's what makes this particularly painful. They often can't explain why they're crying. Someone asks and they don't have an answer. It's not one thing, it's everything. The accumulation of small griefs and large overwhelms and the sheer difficulty of being alive and feeling all of it. But I don't know sounds like they're being evasive. Sounds like they're not trying hard enough to understand themselves. So they learn to manufacture reasons, to point to specific triggers that justify the tears, even when the truth is that their tears need no justification beyond the fact that they're happening. And here's the mechanism that turns natural responsiveness into shame-based pathology. Every time someone reacts to their tears with discomfort, they internalize the message: my emotions are too much. I am too much. Every time they apologize for crying, they reinforce the neural pathway that says feeling is something requiring forgiveness. This is called negative reinforcement in behavioral psychology, though the term doesn't capture the full weight of what's happening. They're not just learning that crying has consequences. They're learning that their fundamental nature is unacceptable. And so they develop what psychologist Donald Winnicott called a false self. The version of themselves that can function in the world, that can attend meetings and maintain relationships and appear stable, while the true self, the one that feels everything, gets locked away. But the true self doesn't stay locked away. It leaks through tears, through sudden overwhelm, through the moments when the performance becomes unsustainable and the feeling breaks through. And each time it breaks through, they experience it not as authentic expression, but as failure, as losing control, as evidence that they still haven't mastered what everyone else seems to handle effortlessly: emotional containment. Except most people haven't mastered it either. They've just gotten better at the performance, better at the numbing, better at the thousand small dissociations that make it through the day without feeling the full weight of existence. These people who cry easily haven't learned those tricks, or can't learn them. Their neurobiology won't cooperate with the cultural demand for emotional flatlining. Such is the psychology that experiences authenticity as failure because the world has redefined emotional honesty as dysfunction. And the cruelest irony, the same people who cry at commercials often cannot cry when they need to most. At funerals, after breakups, in therapy. The tears that come easily for small things become inaccessible for large ones, as if the system is so overwhelmed it shuts down entirely. Psychologists call this emotional flooding, when the nervous system becomes so activated that it bypasses conscious processing and moves straight to physiological response. Or conversely becomes so overwhelmed it goes numb. Neither state feels like choice. Both feel like being at the mercy of something they cannot control. But something shifts when they stop fighting the tears and start getting curious about what the tears are trying to tell them. Not in the reductive sense of tears mean sadness, but in the deeper sense of what is my body trying to process that my mind keeps trying to bypass? Because tears are not just emotional, they're physiological. They release stress hormones. They signal to the nervous system that something needs attention. They are, in the most literal sense, the body's attempt to restore equilibrium. When they cry during a movie, it's not because the movie is particularly tragic. It's because the movie created a safe container for feelings they've been carrying without outlet. The tears aren't about the fictional characters. They're about the real grief, the accumulated losses, the unprocessed overwhelm that finally found permission to express. This is what Bessel van der Kolk means when he writes that the body keeps the score. Trauma, stress, unexpressed emotion, all of it gets stored in the soma. And tears are one of the ways the body attempts discharge. Understanding this changes everything, because it means the tears aren't random, aren't weakness, aren't evidence of being too sensitive or too broken or too anything. They're evidence of a body trying to heal itself, trying to process what the mind keeps trying to intellectualize away. Such is the psychology that discovers that tears are not the problem but the attempted solution. And when they stop apologizing for the tears and start listening to them, they begin to notice patterns. They cry most when they're tired, when they've been holding too much for too long, when they've said yes when they meant no, when they've performed composure while feeling chaos. The tears aren't interrupting their life. The tears are telling them their life needs interruption, needs rest, needs boundaries, needs the kind of honesty that doesn't wait for a safe movie to finally express itself. This doesn't make the tears stop, but it does change their relationship to the tears. From enemy to messenger, from shame to information. Integration doesn't mean learning not to cry. It means learning to cry without apology. This sounds simple. It's not. Because the world still responds to tears with discomfort, still treats emotional expression as imposition, still rewards those who can maintain composure regardless of internal cost. But integration means knowing this about the world and choosing authenticity anyway. Not as performance, not as rebellion, but as the simple acknowledgement. This is how my body processes overwhelm. This is how I'm built. And anyone who cannot handle that is revealing their own limitations, not yours. James Hollis teaches that the second half of life asks us to stop betraying ourselves to please others, to stop performing the version of ourselves that makes others comfortable and start honoring the version that's actually real. For people who cry easily, this means crying in meetings if that's what's happening. Crying during difficult conversations instead of waiting until later. Letting the tears be visible instead of excusing themselves to bathrooms and parked cars. Not because public crying is a goal, but because the constant hiding reinforces the shame. And the shame is the actual wound. The tears are just the body's attempt to heal it. This requires rewriting the narrative. Not, I cry too much, but I feel deeply in a world that punishes depth. Not, I need to stop being so sensitive, but I need to find people who can handle my sensitivity. Because those people exist. The ones who don't flinch when tears appear. Who don't immediately try to fix or minimize or redirect. Who can simply witness feeling without making it mean something is wrong. Such is the psychology that stops seeking acceptance from those incapable of giving it and starts building life among those who already understand. This doesn't happen overnight. The shame runs deep, carved into neural pathways through years of being told subtly and overtly that their tears are too much. But slowly, through practice, they can begin to separate the behavior from the interpretation. They cry easily, that's a fact. It means they're broken. That's an interpretation, one they're no longer required to accept. Pema Chodron writes about the wisdom of no escape, the practice of staying present with what is rather than constantly trying to fix or change or improve it. And for people who cry easily, this means staying present with the tears, not trying to stop them, not apologizing for them, just letting them be what they are, a response, a release, a return to equilibrium. Understanding doesn't erase the tears, but it does transform their meaning. They will still cry at commercials, at songs, at the unexpected kindness of strangers. Their nervous system will still respond to emotional stimuli with tears because that's how it's built. But now they know. This is not malfunction. This is sensitivity. And sensitivity, though exhausting in a harsh world, is also gift. Because they feel joy as deeply as they feel sorrow. Experience beauty as profoundly as they experience pain. Connect to others with an empathy that most people have armored themselves against. The tears are the price of that permeability, the cost of remaining open in a world that rewards closure. And maybe, just maybe, that's exactly what the world needs. People who still feel, who cry at injustice and beauty and the sheer overwhelming difficulty of being human, who refuse to numb themselves into the kind of functional depression that passes for normal. Khalil Gibran wrote, "The deeper that sorrow carves into your being, the more joy you can contain." These people who cry easily have been carved deep, and yes, it hurts. Yes, it's exhausting. Yes, the world makes it harder than it needs to be. But they can hold more, feel more, experience more of what it means to be alive. Such is the psychology of those whose tears are not weakness, but the courage to keep feeling in a world that's forgotten how. The tears will come again, tomorrow, next week, during moments that seem insignificant to everyone else. And they're learning to let them, not with pride, not with performance, but with the quiet recognition that this is their truth. This is their body's language. This is how they move through the world. And anyone who cannot understand that is welcome to look away. But they're done apologizing, done hiding, done treating their depth like pathology. The tears remain, but the shame is finally beginning to dissolve. And in that dissolution lives something unexpected. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of self-acceptance. Such is the psychology that learned the hardest lesson. The world will always be more comfortable with your silence than your tears. But comfort is not the same as truth. They choose truth, even when it leaks from their eyes, even when others look away, even when the cost is high and the misunderstanding is constant. They choose to feel it all, and that perhaps is the bravest thing a person can do.